1990 should have been perfect for Nintendo. The NES was printing money. Kids were trading cartridges at lunch. Your local Blockbuster had a waiting list for Super Mario Bros. 3. But while Nintendo was celebrating, some developers were shipping games so broken, so frustrating, so spectacularly bad that they made you question whether your parents had wasted $50 on a cartridge that belonged in a landfill. Today, we're ranking the 20 worst NES games from 1990. And number 1 is so notoriously terrible, it's still a punchline 34 years later. If you grew up with an NES and you want more deep dives into retro gaming history, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. Let's talk about 1990. The Nintendo Entertainment System was at its absolute peak. Nintendo Power showed up in your mailbox every month with maps, tips, and previews that made you beg your parents for new games. Your local video rental store had an entire wall of NES cartridges. The Game Boy was the hottest Christmas gift. Life was good. But here's what nobody talks about. For every Mega Man 3, every Super Mario Bros. 3, every classic that defined the generation, there were a dozen games that were absolute trash. And 1990 had more than its share of disasters. See, back then, there was no internet, no YouTube reviews, no Metacritic scores. You couldn't Google whether a game was good. You had to rely on box art, maybe a screenshot in a magazine, and pure hope. And developers knew this. They knew they could slap a movie license on a cartridge, throw together some barely functional code, and kids would beg their parents to buy it. Quality control? Optional. So today, we're setting the record straight. These are the 20 worst NES games from 1990, ranked from disappointing to absolutely unplayable. And by the time we hit number 1, you'll understand why some of us still have trust issues with game publishers. Let's start at number 20, Lode Runner. Lode Runner was a classic. The original computer game was fantastic. Puzzle platforming at its finest. But the NES port that dropped in 1990? It was like watching someone take a perfectly good pizza and cover it with gas station sushi. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it consistently poor, and they weren't wrong. The controls were stiff. The level design felt off. The whole thing just didn't capture what made the original special. It's not the worst game on this list, not even close, but it's a perfect example of how even a proven concept can be butchered when nobody cares about the execution. You'd play it for 10 minutes, realize it wasn't fun, and go back to whatever you were playing before. Number 19, King Neptune's Adventure. This was an unlicensed Color Dreams game, and if you know anything about Color Dreams, you know they were the undisputed champions of shovelware. King Neptune's Adventure had you swimming around underwater with controls so floaty and unresponsive, you'd swear your controller was broken. The collision detection was a joke. Enemies would hit you from what felt like 3 feet away. You'd try to dodge and your character would just drift into danger like he was swimming through molasses. And the level design? Every stage looked identical. Same enemies. Same obstacles, same boring underwater caves. It was like the developers made one level and then copy-pasted it 19 times and called it a game. Number 18, Challenge of the Dragon. Another Color Dreams masterpiece. This one tried to be a martial arts adventure, but ended up being a confusing mess where you wandered around aimlessly fighting the same 3 enemies over and over. The combat had no weight to it. You'd punch a guy, and it felt like you were swatting at air. No impact, no feedback, just your character flailing at enemies who barely reacted. The game gave you 0 direction, so you just wander around hoping you'd stumble onto whatever you were supposed to be doing. And good luck figuring out the objective, because the game sure wasn't going to tell you. No map, no hints, just confusion and frustration. Number 17, Menace Beach. Menace Beach was Color Dreams trying to make a platformer, and it went about as well as you'd expect. The gameplay was janky, the hit detection was all over the place, and the visibility was terrible. You'd be running along and suddenly fall into a pit you couldn't see because the screen didn't scroll properly. The enemies were cheap, spawning right on top of you with no warning. The jumps were imprecise, so you'd think you cleared a gap and then just fall through the platform like it wasn't there. The whole thing felt like it was held together with duct tape and broken dreams. Color Dreams really earned their reputation with this one. Number 16, Pesterminator. Pesterminator was another unlicensed disaster from Bunch Games, which was basically Color Dreams under a different name. You played as an exterminator fighting bugs, which sounds like it could be fun. It wasn't. The controls were unplayable. Your character moved like he was walking through wet cement. Enemies swarmed you from all directions, and you couldn't react fast enough because the controls were so sluggish. The hit detection was broken, so you'd shoot at bugs, and your shots would just pass through them. And the difficulty was absurd. Not challenging. Just cheap. Enemies everywhere. No pattern to learn. Just chaos. It felt less like a game and more like a test to see how much frustration you could tolerate before turning off the console. Number 15. Jack Nicklaus Major Championship Golf. Golf games on the NES could be great. Jack Nicklaus was the most famous golfer on the planet in 1990. This should have been a slam dunk. Instead, it was a boring, clunky mess that made golf feel like homework. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.75 out of 10, which in 1990, Nintendo Power scores was basically a failing grade. The controls were overly complicated. The swing meter was inconsistent. The courses looked bland. And the whole experience just felt lifeless. You'd play a few holes, realize you weren't having any fun, and go outside to throw a football instead. When your golf video game makes people want to go outside, you've failed. Number 14, Paperboy 2. Here's the thing about Paperboy 2. The original Paperboy was fantastic. Arcade classic. The NES port was great. Everyone loved it. So a sequel should have been easy money, right? Wrong. Paperboy 2 somehow managed to be worse than the original in every way. The controls felt floatier. The obstacles were cheaper. The level design was less interesting. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.75 out of 10, and that was generous. It's not that Paperboy 2 was unplayable. It's that it was unnecessary. It added nothing. It improved nothing. It was just a worse version of a game you already owned. Why would you play this when you could just play the original? Number 13, Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Movie and TV tie-in games in the early 90s were almost always terrible, and Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was no exception. Based on the TV show nobody really watched, this game had you playing as teenage Indiana Jones doing, honestly, I'm not even sure what. The gameplay was generic side-scrolling action with stiff controls and boring level design. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.80 out of 10. The problem wasn't that it was broken. The problem was that it was aggressively mediocre. Nothing about it was interesting. Nothing about it was fun. It was just there, taking up space on store shelves, hoping some kid would convince their parents to buy it because it had Indiana Jones in the title. Number 12, Pinball Quest. Pinball games on the NES were always a gamble. Some were decent. Most were forgettable. Pinball Quest tried to be different by adding RPG elements to pinball. You'd play pinball to fight enemies and level up. It sounds creative. It wasn't. The pinball physics felt wrong. The ball moved too slowly. The flippers were unresponsive. And the RPG elements were so shallow, they might as well not have existed. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.90 out of 10. It was an interesting idea executed poorly. You'd play it for 15 minutes, realize the gimmick wasn't working, and go back to playing actual pinball or actual RPGs. It failed at being both. Number 11, Pictionary. Pictionary was a massive board game in the late 80s and early 90s. Everyone had it. Everyone played it at parties. So naturally, someone decided to make an NES version. And naturally, it was terrible. The problem with Pictionary on NES is that the whole point of Pictionary is drawing and guessing with your friends. On NES, you're using a controller to draw pixel art on a tiny screen. It's not fun. It's frustrating. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.95 out of 10. The game tried to recreate the board game experience and failed completely. If you wanted to play Pictionary, you just play actual Pictionary. The NES version was pointless. Number 10, Super Glove Ball. Super Glove Ball was designed to be played with the Power Glove, which, if you remember, was one of the worst gaming peripherals ever made. The Power Glove looked cool. It worked terribly. And Super Glove Ball was built around it. Even if you played it with a regular controller, the game was mediocre at best. It was basically 3D Breakout with awkward controls and boring level design. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.65 out of 10. The whole thing felt like a tech demo that somehow got released as a full-price game. It was a gimmick with no substance, and once the novelty wore off after 5 minutes, there was nothing left. Number 9, Peter Pan and the Pirates. Based on a cartoon that aired for one season, Peter Pan and the Pirates was a generic platformer with nothing to distinguish it from the dozens of other generic platformers clogging store shelves in 1990. The controls were stiff, the level design was uninspired, the graphics were bland. Nintendo Power gave it a 4.95 out of 10, which was one of the lowest scores they gave that year. It wasn't offensively bad, it was just boring. And in a year that gave us so many great games, boring was almost worse than broken. You'd rent this, play it for an hour, and return it the same day. Number 8, Bigfoot. Bigfoot was a monster truck racing game that somehow managed to make monster trucks boring. Think about that. Monster trucks. Giant trucks crushing cars. Jumps. Chaos. How do you make that boring? By making the controls terrible and the gameplay repetitive. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.55 out of 10. The trucks handled like boats. The tracks were bland. The whole experience felt lifeless. You'd race a few laps, realize there was no depth to the gameplay, and wonder why you weren't playing Excitebike instead. Bigfoot took an inherently exciting concept and drained all the fun out of it. Number 7, Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice was a hit movie in 1988. The animated series was airing in 1990. Kids loved it. So LJN, the kings of terrible movie tie-in games, decided to make an NES game, and it was exactly as bad as you'd expect from LJN. The gameplay was a confusing mess. You'd wander around, collecting items with no clear objective. The controls were clunky. The level design made no sense. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.50 out of 10. The worst part? Kids bought it anyway, because it had Beetlejuice on the box. That's what LJN counted on. They knew the license would sell copies regardless of quality. And they were right. Beetlejuice sold well despite being terrible, which is why LJN kept making terrible games for years. Number 6, Dragon's Lair. Dragon's Lair was a legendary arcade game. Beautiful Don Bluth animation. Innovative gameplay. It was a quarter-eating machine that everyone wanted to play. So, when it came to NES in 1990, people were excited. And then they played it. The NES version had nearly a 1-second input lag. 1 second. In a game where timing is everything. You'd press a button, and your character would react a full second later, which meant you were already dead. The game was nearly unplayable. It's ranked as the 45th worst NES game of all time. Dragon's Lair on NES was a perfect example of a great concept destroyed by technical limitations and poor execution. The arcade game was amazing. The NES port was a disaster. Number 5, Castle of Deceit. Castle of Deceit was another Bunch Games disaster. This one tried to be an action-adventure game, but ended up being a frustrating mess of cheap deaths and confusing level design. The game gave you no direction. You'd wander around a castle with no idea where to go or what to do. Enemies would spawn on top of you. Traps were invisible until you triggered them. The controls were stiff and unresponsive. It's ranked as the 49th worst NES game ever made. Castle of Deceit felt like it was designed to punish players rather than entertain them. Every death felt cheap. Every room felt like a trap. It wasn't challenging. It was just mean. Number 4, Monster Truck Rally. Monster Truck Rally should have been great. Monster trucks were huge in 1990. Kids loved them. But this game took everything exciting about monster trucks and made it boring. Nintendo Power gave it a 2.4 out of 5, which was one of the lowest scores they gave that year. The controls were terrible. The trucks handled like they were made of lead. The challenge was non-existent. You'd race a few times, realize there was no depth, and never touch it again. Monster Truck Rally is a perfect example of a game that was rushed out to capitalize on a trend without any thought given to whether it was actually fun. Number 3, Mad Max. Mad Max was based on the iconic post-apocalyptic movie franchise. It should have been awesome, driving through the wasteland, fighting raiders, scavenging for supplies. Instead, it was a broken mess. Nintendo Power gave it a 2.5 out of 5. The controls were awful. Your car handled like a shopping cart with broken wheels. The graphics were ugly and monotonous, and the password system was broken, so you couldn't even save your progress properly. You'd play for an hour, write down the password, come back later, enter it, and the game would tell you it was invalid. Mad Max on NES was a waste of a great license and a waste of everyone's time. Number 2, Total Recall. Total Recall was one of the biggest movies of 1990. Arnold Schwarzenegger, mind-bending sci-fi, action, explosions. Everyone saw it. So when the NES game came out, kids begged their parents to buy it, and it was absolutely terrible. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a 2.75 out of 5 and called it a total reject. The graphics looked like they belonged on the Atari 2600. The gameplay was generic side-scrolling action with terrible controls. Nothing about it captured what made the movie great. But here's the thing. Total Recall still sold well because kids didn't know it was bad until after they'd already bought it. That's the tragedy of 1990. You couldn't know a game was garbage until you'd already wasted your money. Number 1, Rally Bike. Rally Bike is the worst NES game from 1990. Nintendo Power gave it a 2 out of 5, the lowest score they gave that year. And it deserved it. The graphics were ugly. The controls were terrible. The gameplay was boring. You'd race a bike through courses that all looked the same, fighting controls that made your bike feel like it was stuck in mud. There was no sense of speed, no excitement, no reason to keep playing. Rally Bike represents everything wrong with NES games in 1990. It was rushed. It was lazy. It was released because someone thought they could make a quick buck, not because anyone cared about making a good game. And that's why it's number 1 on this list. Not because it was broken like Dragon's Lair. Not because it was a disappointing sequel like Paperboy 2. But because it was just bad. Fundamentally, completely, irredeemably bad. Rally Bike is the kind of game that made you question whether you even liked video games. You'd play it for 10 minutes and think, is this it? Is this what I spent my allowance on? And then you'd turn off the console and go outside. That's the legacy of Rally Bike, the worst NES game from 1990. So there you have it. 20 games that promised fun and delivered frustration. 20 cartridges that should have stayed on the factory floor. 20 reasons why we're grateful for YouTube reviews and Metacritic scores today. The lesson here is simple. Not every game from the Golden Age was golden. For every classic, there were a dozen disasters. And 1990 had more than its share. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, or if I brought back some painful memories you tried to forget, drop a comment and let me know which of these games you actually played. Did you rent Total Recall from Blockbuster? Did you beg your parents for Beetlejuice? Did you suffer through Rally Bike? I want to hear your stories. And if you want to see more retro gaming content like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more deep dives coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. Thanks for watching, and remember, not every game from your childhood was as good as you remember. Some of them were always terrible.